Hey, what's going on, everybody? We've learned how to read from a file, we learned how to take user input, and now let's learn how to write to a file. Before we get started today, special shout out to my man Sharkhead Spark, who actually subscribed to this channel. I'm not sure why you did it, but I appreciate you nonetheless. With all that out of the way, let's get into it.
And what?
Okay, let's jump right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Java folder with Visual Studio Code. And let's go ahead and make a file. I'm going to go ahead and call this file write.java. We're going to make a class called write as well. And then we're going to make a main method. Go ahead and say it with me. Public static void main string array args, and let's get into it. Okay, so before we jump into the actual coding, let's bring an import in, and we're going to import the Java IO library. So I'm going to import that by saying import java.io.star. So let's do a new concept inside of our main method. This is called a try catch block, and it looks like this. Try, open and close curly brackets. Then after the curly bracket at the bottom, we're going to say catch, open and close parentheses, open and close curly bracket. So this is the basic anatomy of a try catch block, and the purpose of it is to catch any potential errors that can occur while you're coding. Now, the particular type of error that we're interested in here is called an IO exception. And that comes up whenever you're using the IO library. So you're going to use the IO exception whenever you're using the IO library in order to make sure that you pass the errors forward properly. Now, what do I want to happen if there is an error? So when you see the word catch, I want you to think that you're catching an error. And here, what I'm going to do when I catch the error, I'm just simply going to print it. I'm going to say system.out.print e, and that is going to log the error to the screen for me so I could see it if I need it. Okay, so we're going to need two objects from the IO library. The first one we're going to need is a file object. So I'm going to say file equals new file. And then we're going to put inside the file, let's call our file we're going to make sports.txt. And then the next object we're going to make is what's going to allow us to actually write to files. It's called the file writer. So I'm going to say file writer fw equals new file writer. And let's also call this sports.txt. Make sure that these match up because we're going to use both of these later throughout the lecture. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. Let's actually write to a file. So to write to a file, I'm going to call fw for file writer and then say write. Pretty cool, right? No pun intended. And then what I want to do is I want to make a list. I'm going to call this best running backs of all time. And then you can make whatever list you want, groceries or whatever. We're going to do best running backs of all time to have some fun here. And then I'm going to end this with a \n, and that is going to represent a new line, just in case you haven't seen it before. This is the equivalent of hitting enter on your enter key when you're inside of like a text file. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and put a list of the top 3 best running backs of all time. So I'm going to say first, we'll say fw.write, and the number 1 running back of all time is Emmitt Smith. This is going to make some people angry, but Emmitt Smith is the best running back in NFL history. Sorry to say, 18,355 yards speaks louder than anything any other running back has done. Get over it. Anyway, back to the lecture. Hey, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and in this case, my opinion just so happens to be right. I'm going to get killed in the comments. But let's continue. I'm going to do the next running back, so I'll say fw.write, and then in here we're going to put number 2, and that's going to be number 20, Barry Sanders. And Barry was amazing. Not as good as Emmitt though, sorry. Let's go ahead and go to number 3, and that's going to be none other than Mr. Walter Payton, who they called Sweetness, another great running back. So now that we've got a list of 3 running backs that we like, let's do one last thing. We're going to do fw.close, and we're going to make sure that we save this. But the one thing I want to point out by this fw.close, you might be curious about what this is doing. So The file writer, when we call file writer, if it's successful, it's going to open the file to operate on. You can do as many write operations as you would like to do, but one thing that you always want to do whenever you open something is you want to make sure you close it so that way that it doesn't cause any kind of memory leaks or any other issues like that. For every open, you want to close. So that's why I have a close here. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and save this and get to the fun stuff. I'm going to go ahead and open my command prompt, and we're going to go to our desktop and our Java folder. And then we're going to compile with javac write.java. And then we're going to run it with Java write. Now it doesn't look like anything happened here, but if we look over on our left-hand side, we can see sports.txt was created. And if I click on it, I can see best running backs of all time, Emmitt Smith, Barry Sanders, and Wheelter Payton. Oh, I wish I spelled that right. Sorry, Walter. That's pretty cool. However, there is a little bit of a problem with our implementation. And let me show you by writing a bunch of gibberish. So by putting all this gibberish, make sure that you save this. And what we're going to do now is just call our file again by saying Java write. And notice that it updated and it was able to save my running backs again. But if I call it again, notice nothing happened. And if I call it again, also still nothing happened. Why is that? Well, let's go back to our write.java file really quick. The reason why that's happening, and let me fix this so it says Walter Payton because that's really bugging me. The reason why that's happening is because whenever you call FileWriter, there's actually another variable that you can pass as a parameter, and that's the append variable. So if I put a Boolean true here, that means that I want to append values to a file, not just overwrite the file. So to be clear, if you just pass a file, you can write to a file, but every other time you write, it'll overwrite the file that you did. However, if you pass the Boolean true, it's then going to append to the file. So instead of just writing, it'll actually find the file, find where you last left off, and write to it. Now, let's save this and see what happens when we run it. So I'm going to run it once. Let's go back to our sports.txt file so we can see nothing changed. Let's run it again. Oops, one thing I forgot to do, compile. So let's compile and then run. Whoops. I'm making all sorts of mistakes tonight. And now you can see it's actually appending to the end of the file. So you can see every single time I call Java write, it's actually writing to the end of the file. But the thing is, it's writing the same thing over and over, and that's not very interesting to us. Let's make it so that way it can make our list longer if we already have a list. So I'm going to erase this now. In fact, let's just delete the entire file. And let's go back over to our write.java file. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up a conditional to check to see if the file exists. So I'm going to make a little Boolean right here between file and FileWriter, and I'll explain that in a second. So we're going to say exists equals, and then we're going to say file.exists. And this is a nice little method that's going to check to see if a file exists for us. So let's use that file by making an if condition above our writes here. We're going to say if, and then we're going to say exists. And then we're going to put our brackets around our write statements here. And now let's tab everything over to make sure our spacing is good. And this if statement is just checking to see, so if a file does not exist, then write the top 3 RBs. Now, I'm saying does not exist, so you know what's coming next. I need to put either an exclamation point here, or I can simply just say equals equals false. And they both mean the same thing. So I'm going to leave that for this one. And now let's do our else statement, because if it does exist, then we want to append to it. So this right here is if it does exist, make the list bigger. Okay, so let's now make our list bigger by adding 2 more running backs to round out our top 5. I'm going to say fw.write. And then at number 4, I'm going to put Adrian Peterson. And we'll do another \n. And then at number 5, I'm probably going to date myself a little with this one. I'm going to say number 5 is going to be Curtis Martin of the Jets. If you've never seen him play, I definitely advise it if you like football. He's a really good running back. And finally, I'm going to say fw.close because remember, for every open, so we open here, we want to close. And even though I close inside of here, notice that we might not come back inside of this if statement, so I want to close it here too. So that way I close it in either branch that it can go into. All right, so let's see if this works. I don't have a sports.txt file right now because I deleted it. So let's open this. We're going to compile again. And now we should have a sports.txt file when I run this. And there it is. So let's go into here and we can see that we have our top 3. And now let's run this again and see what happens. Hey, look at that. We got our top 5. So we have all the best running backs of all time, including Emmitt Smith. He's the greatest of all time. Sorry. But now you can see a couple of different ways to write to the file. So let's come back over really quick. And I want to talk about a couple other things too, just in case. So notice that I put exists right here between file and FileWriter. So remember how I was talking about FileWriter is going to open a file. Well, since FileWriter is going to open a file, if I put this Boolean check, say right after that, the file's always going to be open. Let me demonstrate what I mean. So if I delete this sports.txt right here, let's delete it real quick. And then let's just simply do a print statement right here. System.out.print, and then we're going to do exists. So this should print out true or false. And since this is our first run, we should see false first. Let's compile and run. So compile and run. And you can see we got false. But if we run it again, we get true. What happens if we move these down right underneath? So let's close these out here and paste. And let's make sure that our alignment is right. So I'm going to save that. And we're going to delete this one more time. So what do you think is going to print out now? Do you think false or true is going to print out next? Let's find out. So I'm going to compile. And let's run it. Notice that we get true. And even better still, if we open our sports.txt file, notice it printed only 4 and 5. It should have printed 1, 2, and 3 first. So this is one thing that I wanted to take a moment to point out, that the order in which you define things matters. And in fact, right here, you can see that just by moving this exist to under the FileWriter where it's creating the file, this is always going to be true now, no matter if I delete the file or not. So make sure that you're always kind of cognizant of that stuff and you understand what's going on. So FileWriter is opening the file as soon as you get past this object creation. That's something important to keep in mind. But beyond that, that's pretty much everything for this lecture. So I'm going to go ahead now and throw it back to Dino in the future. That's all for today's lesson. Now we've gone through some of the stuff that honestly I felt was probably some of the more intimidating things when I was first starting out, which was reading from a file, taking input, and writing to a file. But with writing to a file kind of being that last little hurdle, I wanted to make sure that we knocked it out together. That's all I got for today. I hope you enjoyed. I am DB, you are you. Let's keep rocking and let's keep learning. Peace out, everybody. All right, I'll give it to you. I hope you know that I make myself dizzy for you. Peace out, everybody.